Welcome everyone to today's WOW session. Thank you for joining us on this holiday Friday before the holiday weekend kind of situation. We appreciate you joining us at this special time on this Friday. My name is Erin. I am your host for today, one of the business managers here at AIM. If you ever have any questions, please feel free to reach out. I am here to support you in anything that you need. Today it is a webinar format, so you can hear and see us, but we cannot hear or see you. So how are you going to interact with us today? It will be through the chat function. So locate that at the bottom of the screen. You should see a chat. If you do not readily see that, you will see a circle with three dots, and you will click on that, and it should appear there for you. And if somebody will go ahead and chat in for me and say hi, just so I can know you can also hear us and make sure. Great. Thank you, Ashley, Darla, Brandy. Good morning. All right. So we can also hear me, which is also a plus for today. All right. So that takes care of the housekeeping today, and we are going to go ahead and get this started. So we have an awesome presentation for you. A really critical need for a lot of organizations, coming off of a conversation about succession planning last month. If you happen to attend that Succession Madness event that we hosted, it is just a large topic of conversation. If you joined us at our leadership conference last week, any of our events, we constantly talk about developing our leaders. And so, returning favorite, Tanya Zion has joined us today to talk about developing our emerging leaders. So, Tanya, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Erin, as always, thank you for inviting me to be part of this. And excuse me, it's funny, you were talking about the succession planning, and I was like, oh, wait, I did that. We did do that, right? I don't know if anybody else on the call is feeling like life is moving at warp speed, and you're like, wait a minute, hold on. How is June 1st in our like sights? But I know Erin and I are definitely feeling that way with all of the exciting things that have been happening at AIM, and hopefully ways that you feel like we have been able to serve you. So as you noted, as we started, I love the React button. The webinar is not my favorite format. Anybody that's sat in on one of my talks knows that I feel like you guys are always way smarter than I am. So we hope that you will be keyboard warriors in the best way today. Participate in the chat. Even though this is a webinar, it is intended to be somewhat interactive. So even if that's just finding the React button, I did not know there were rocket ships. So that's new since the last time I was there. So I kind of like it. I'm going to age myself. I always give you some insight into my kids, but Little Einsteins was the cartoon that my kids were really into when they were little, and that rocket ship reminds me of the Little Einsteins. Now I'm gonna have the theme. If anybody else now has that theme in their head, go ahead and give me a laughy face and be able to do that. No way. But that is what that reminded me of. So, anyways, how about a random thing to start? So when I'm asked to speak at AIM, a lot of times we do a lot of collaboration to say, what do we think people are dealing with? What are we hearing in the engagement surveys? What are we hearing just in like the coaching that I'm doing and the leadership teams that I'm working at? And I think this concept of emerging leaders keeps coming up. I do a workshop on generations in the workplace, and what I hear so much from leaders is this newest generation, they just seem a little different. They approach work different than I do. And so we've got some tools to handle that on how do we bridge that gap. But there are going to be people that you're hiring that you just know. You see a spark in them. They are eager. They are ready. They're extremely competent. They're problem solvers and useful. And sometimes in our organizations, we just don't have this natural path to keep them engaged. And I think about, when you grid out your performers, whether you're using, a 9 box or just simply a grid of like, hey, is this person one of my stars? Are they disengaged? Where are they on that motivation skill axis? And so today we're going to spend a lot of time talking about our star performers. And in busyness, in having those moments where everything feels like it's spinning out of control and I can never get to the bottom of my to-do list. Erin and I were talking about that off air before we came in. I know some of you can relate to that. I think it's really easy to let what's going well just go well. And we don't always put a lot of intentionality around, hey, I need to make sure I'm reaching out and telling that person good job, or they're doing such a good job at their job. I don't necessarily have a system in the same way that I have for my employees that maybe are falling behind. So that's why we're going to spend some time talking about this today. And what I would love to know before we even jump in, I'm going to show my agenda, but head to your keyboards because this is kind of what I have on the agenda. But I feel like you all are investing an hour of your time too. We have an hour, right, Erin? Is that how long we have? Okay.
Yes.
Don't want to mess that up. This is what I have on my agenda is really the pipeline problem. Like what's going on in the workforce, and what are we doing to this, leader pipeline and what's causing some problems. And then we're going to talk a little bit about how to onboard with intent. And we're going to talk about orientation versus onboarding and get some clarity around language. And then really career pathing that creates clarity. Career pathing is really hard. If you are in a smaller organization, we have a question on our employee engagement survey that says, I'm provided with opportunities for career growth. And I look at some of the organizations that we work with, and that scores low. And I kind of dig in a little bit. I'm like, okay, you're an organization with 37 people, and everybody does the job that they do. And so, how do we create career pathing in those types of organizations? So we're going to talk a little bit about that. And then we're going to really dig into training versus development and how do we get these leaders and how do we work with them? And I am just going to tell you from the get-go, I have worked with organizations. Edge Mentoring is an organization out of Indiana that I was involved in. And this is really where I developed a heart for the emerging leaders. We came together twice a month. They were small cohorts, and we really talked about the work of leaders. And it was really neat to be able to just give them a forum to come in and have safe space and ask questions. I don't know if you've all heard this kind of going around social media, but it's the idea that we don't have third places anymore in the world. We have our home life and we have our work life, but where we used to have like social clubs or people belong to someplace, they called that the third place. And in some ways, when we do group coaching right, when we do development plans, I kind of think of it as the same way, right? Like you have your team, you have your organization, and then you have this other group that you've built trust with that you're able to take things to and be able to talk to them. And it's a place where they're known. And so, what I love about it is when we put a group coaching model into an organization, it really fits well with succession planning because you're allowing those people further down in the organization to build those teamworks and be able to do that. And then finally, if you've sat in on anything I do, I don't want this to live in the webinar. If you're going to invest an hour of your time, I really want you to have an actionable thing that can go in your calendar. However, this is my plan. So if this wasn't what you were hoping, if we missed the mark on the description to this, go ahead and throw in what you want me to talk about, and I'll see if I have any knowledge on it. Sometimes I do. So if you have any specific scenarios that you're hoping to solve today or any information that you want, then go ahead and put that in chat. Amy, I'm going to read that. Thank you. You were a very good keyboard warrior. And if this is worth your time and you feel like this would be a good agenda, go ahead and give us a thumbs up. So Amy, I'm going to read this. Many times we don't know who the emerging leaders we need to develop are at the time of hire. 100% agree. Talking about how to do this for existing employees who have already been onboarded and trained would be helpful. Totally agree. And we're going to talk about both of those things. How do we identify? And we don't always know. And how are we supporting our managers and really pulling those people out and understanding in the conversation? So, Amy, hold me accountable to that. And if we don't get to it, pop up in the questions and I'll make sure that I address that. Erin, I think I read fast, but did I miss anything so far?
You're good.
All right, cool. Um, that third group, Julie, I love that. I know, like, don't you need that third group, whatever it is, whether it's organized or not? Lots and lots of studies out in the world saying that we all need that. And can I just relate, like in adulthood, sometimes it's really hard to find that. Like if you don't have, a pickleball team, I, I need to learn pickleball. Everybody's been talking about it, and I think I might actually like it. So if you're a pickleball person, put that in there too. All right, it's Friday before a holiday. I can tell my brain is wandering. All right, so let's kind of start. And for those, I've been saying this a lot. Beth, I love that you have an HR group of ladies. Okay, I see. I knew if I said pickleball, people would talk about it and HR teams. Awesome. So if you sat on any of these webinars, and if you haven't, we'll pull the data for you, but I wasn't going to bore you with the same slides. We have a population decline that's happening. And so when we think about who we're able to like recruit and then hire and then retain to be able to develop them, um, we're just in this new era. And the reason for that is in 2008, we went through a recession. People don't have as many kids during a recession. And so now, fast forward, we have this gap in our population and it's declining. And it's happening in the US, it's happening in Europe, it's happening really all over the world. Then, on top of that, we went through this major revolution, kind of, I'm going to call it that, where we had the great resignation, and then we just didn't fill jobs because people were moving around. And so our organizations have changed. And a lot of people, when we look at total headcount, we've taken on more work, but our headcount numbers haven't necessarily kept up. So there's just a lot of these things that are happening where we don't have as many people in our organizations. And part of what we're seeing is that managers are really taking on more and more work or more and more headcount underneath them. So all of those things are sort of happening. And then we have this thing that everyone won't stop talking about, and that is AI. And one of the things I talked about in the leadership conference is this idea that we are automating entry level positions. And so a lot of those jobs where we're just learning, right? I mean, I think about my very first job out of college and I made some oopsies for sure, right? And just in the things, but it taught me things. It taught me that I can make a mistake and bounce back. It taught me that maybe everyone else doesn't communicate the way that I do. And so I need to be aware of those sorts of things. And what we're seeing in companies, and some of you may not be there yet, but I do think in some ways it's coming, is that those very entry level jobs that we've all relied upon to really test our bench strength, to be able to say, hey, does this person have potential or not? We're able to automate a lot of those low level, low impact tasks that maybe are very repetitive to the organization, but it doesn't allow us a chance to really test our employees and see where their skills are. So, what we need to really look at is where do we find the leadership and how do we develop it amongst all of these competing forces? And so, I pulled some data, I always like data, and they're staggering. Some of this, people are out there surveying organizations and they're saying, hey, what are you doing? And 77% of the CHROs really lack confidence in their leadership bench strength. And I know this because we get phone calls all the time. We have new leaders on our leadership team, and I don't think it's working. I don't think they're working well together. I don't think they're leading their teams well. And so even when we put people in those leadership positions, they're not always working out. And so we're looking for outside supports to really help with that. And we're not surprised by this, right? Because how often are we able to do full assessments and take all the groundwork that's needed to really identify those leaders? And back to the point that was made earlier, those are things that we need to be doing. We need to be incorporating them into our daily practices because it's those exact tools that are allowing us to find those emerging leaders. So the disciplines that we all know that are important that quite frankly aren't working super well right now, like performance appraisals and those sorts of things, in most organizations that I work with are a once a year event. And so how do we pick those leaders out at the pace of business if we're only really looking and reviewing our talent annually? So that would be the first thing that I would put on everyone's takeaway is when are we assessing talent and what tools are we using to do that? And if you don't have a favorite assessment tool, AIM has several that we can use that are pretty low level, where we can index a good performer for a specific role and then have people take those assessments to be able to do that. And our managers need to be aware of this because they are the ones that have this knowledge. And I think the challenge for HR is how do we pull that information out of the managers' heads and be able to use it in a meaningful way across the organization? And so, and then once we do that, once we identify them, how do we then get them the training that they need. So with this, I would love for everyone to jump into the comments again. Again, we're going to be keyboard warriors. First question, and you can do a thumbs up if you're doing this, or you can give us the type. Do you have a process where you are using assessments to evaluate your workforce? And if so, give us a little bit of insight to what you're doing, because I would love to meet you all where you are. So if you're using assessments and we have something that we're working that into our normal routine where we're able to identify emerging leaders, put them through assessment, and be able to do that. Um, oh, Chris, assessments and calibration, first ever. Ouch. I would love to know more. Okay, Julie, I think you're in the same boat. We do have them, but it isn't great. It's only once a year. Misty says, hey, we're starting to, probably will be in the next few years. Ah, the next few years, right? That's so hard because there's competing organizational interests. You know it needs to be done, but how do we make this a priority? Jill, you can maybe give us some insight because if you're doing it annual and mid-year, that is great. And maybe Beth could learn from maybe how you did that. So if you guys want to have some sidebars in the chat, I think that's really important. Love that you're doing calibration sessions. And then, okay, Karen, you have got quarterly performance check-ins as well as annual. I would love to know more because I do think that's the gold standard, right? In my world, as we're looking at, and we really look at that team engagement directly determined by the managers, that's a huge statistic, is we're really looking at how do we make annual reviews less tedious. And for me, when I was managing people, I had a very simple, like 3 box system where it was like, okay, what is it that you are capable, like, what are your projects that you're working on? Assign the percentage of time that you're working on them, and then give me a status, grade yourself. And that was a living document where we just kept that alive. And every time I had a one on one, it was the exact same agenda, right? We were able to say, this is what I'm working on, this is what's taking up my time, this is the development and the tools. And then I had that background overall, right? So when I came to write performance reviews, all the data was there. There was no surprise because it was this ongoing communication. And I think and this would be a good webinar, Erin, is to talk about what should that one-on-one look like, right? What templating are we using? What's the frequency? How do we determine it? And then how do we take what we learn in those one-on-ones and bring it up? But I think if we're not doing that and we don't have this trigger for assessment, that's where we have to start on the emerging leader because we really do have a pipeline problem with being able to find them. So not everybody weighed in. It looks like a lot of you are doing quarterly, which is great. Some of you are just still trying to figure out how to implement this. So you're not alone. If you need help in implementing performance, that's work that I've done with several organizations. We're here to help, and we can kind of set you up on a cadence that makes the whole thing easier. I think the other thing with performance reviews, as we think about managers, is it's hard, right? How do we get consistency among managers and rating and the numbers and all of that? And we've got several trainers here at AIM that do company-wide or manager-wide training as it relates to that. So we're able to help with that as well. But so that's kind of the overview, right? We've got this pipeline problem. We'd have patchy information that's coming in that we're trying to use. And a lot of times what I think happens is we are super excited in the interview process. Hey, I think this is a strong candidate. They're really awesome. We go through orientation and we're like, yeah, I think we did a good job on the HR side of things. And then we hand them over to the hiring manager. We hand them over to their team. And what I'm learning is a lot of people don't have visibility into what happens. And it's funny because I've used the word onboarding for a long time. You guys know this about me. I don't have a background directly in HR. I was in operations for most of, the time that I was in. And then I do a lot of consulting with HR now because I'm always curious how the people arm of organizations work. But onboarding to me isn't a moment in time. It's a journey, right? That we get people fully onboarded. And so the one encouragement that I would just, this is the second takeaway to think about, is are you calling day one onboarding? And if you are, I think the invitation exists to be able to call that orientation because that orientation, like we think a lot about, oh, I'm onboarding them onto my HRIS system or I'm onboarding them onto my benefits, but really you're orientating them to the organization. So, however you want to use that, I think there's a difference between day one orientation, like here's where you find the facilities and here's how you log on to the intranet, and true onboarding, which cannot be a single moment in time. And so that's the question that we really need to look at is starting from the beginning. Yeah, absolutely, Chris. Pre-boarding, orientation, onboarding, and then the sustainability. Totally agree with that. Karen, I love that you have an HRIS system that prompts for those quarterly check-ins and performance check-ins and all that sort of thing. But, I think absolutely right, Chris, to your point, we are doing this. It's a journey, right? For people to say, I've decided to take this job. We negotiate what that is going to look like in terms of compensation and all of that. And Missy, I agree. It doesn't matter what you call it as long as you do it well. But the problem is, if we don't have good language to name it, I think sometimes, and especially with our senior leadership, we think that once they're onboarded on day one, they're done, right? And we don't put as much time and effort into making sure there's standardization and consistency no matter where that person goes. And so with a lot of the hiring managers, it really is up to how they do that full onboarding process, which if you look at the data, it's about 6 months for people to really just feel like, okay, I know what my job is, I know what meetings I need to be at, I know where I fit in the organization. And a lot of times, what we're doing is we're just leaving people a little less guided than they feel like they need to be. So, the thing we want to get right through that onboarding process, and this is why I don't think it happens in a single moment, is role clarity. This should have happened before we even did an offer letter, but really talking about all of that. And then relationship mapping. This I see overwhelmingly is something we can get better at. I can't tell you the number of surveys that I do when we ask people to rate the executive leadership team and they don't know who that is. And so, how do you fit in the organization? What are people responsible for? And even just a small overview is really important. And so being able to do that, and if your first day doesn't have sort of, hey, this is how you fit in the organization, I would highly encourage you to think about that. And then I also think the managers need to do that for their teams and to be able to continue that conversation. Julie says you've started high performing managers to start using one on one check ins with their staff. Love that. I think that's really, really important. And I also love what you're building, right? You're taking people that you know are already doing it well, you're overlaying that with technology, and then you have a case study to take to the people that maybe aren't thought leaders in that. Which, Julie, can we just have a chat for a moment? I can't tell you the number of times that I've heard people say, oh, that problem will be solved when we implement our HRAS. Sorry for everyone on the phone that thinks that. Erin, do you want to speak to this? You know
No
that,
problems ever solved once technology is
right?
just implemented magically. No, 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 no.
Yeah,
That's where
absolutely.
massive problems happen.
Yeah, so I mean, you've got to have a solid system that's going on before you ever get anything coming in to technology. Technology maybe will give you a framework, but you've got to have all of the steps. All right, Chris, I'm already influencing. You're trying to decide, is it orientation or onboarding? I love it. And yes, I think each manager was able to know who's on the leadership team and just have a little bit of insight to that. So relationship mapping, I think, is important. And then a lot of people are doing the buddy system when you come in, where they have, an ambassador or someone like that, which I think is excellent. We should continue that practice. And I think we should beef it up because a lot of times we're taking volunteers and maybe they're just personable, friendly people that are helping. But I would love to see everybody go to the next step, and that is give them a framework. What should they be talking about? How can they advocate for that employee? Are there conversations? That we're able to have to be able to do that. And so really thinking about how do we put that person in an advocate, and then even more so is that person then having a scheduled call with the hiring manager, right? Do we have check-ins to be like, hey, how do we think they're doing? Is there any support they need to be able to do that? The other thing that's really, really important, and we all don't do this as well, I think, as we could, because I go in focus groups, and one of the questions I love to ask is, when was the last time you celebrated a success? And what I hear a lot is, well, they brought ice cream in last summer for like the summer holiday. And I'm like, but did you earn that? Like, why did that happen? And they're like, oh, it was our employee engagement activity. And I always just chuckle. I love ice cream. Let's bring ice cream in for summer. I think that creates a fun culture. I think there's definitely value in there, but it's very different from celebrating a win. And so for this onboarding process, for these new hires, being able to have like, hey, here's what you're going to be able to accomplish in 30 days, and we're going to check in on it, and having that. And that is going to take coordination with your hiring managers, but being able to provide them sort of that framework of saying, what's a win look like for this position, and how do we build up to that so that people have that early win. And the other thing that I think is really important is we should be talking about development from day one. What does this person want? Why? What about work excites them? What skills do they want to get? And what we're really looking for is, can they problem solve? Can they do some of those things? Because the world and the workplace is really, really changing. So this is kind of like statement one, as we think about onboarding, we've got to have these pillars in place, that we have these observation zones to start finding those emerging leaders. And I think that's sort of what was said earlier is, we don't maybe know from the jump that that person is going to be that, but do we have these processes and these check-ins, and do we have the tools to help our managers through assessment, through quarterly reviews, whatever it is that we're doing, to be able to document this, to say, hey, this person's really knocking it out of the park. So I do have some discussion, and you guys are doing great in the chat. Keep it up. I love my keyboard warriors. Who knew eighth grade typing? Remember, we used to take eighth grade. Erin, you didn't take eighth grade typing, did you?
I did too.
In eighth grade, though, or did you do it sooner?
Oh, well, actually, I didn't take it until high school.
Yeah, I think my kids took it in like elementary school. Yeah,
Just in
Chris,
high school.
okay, Chris did it in high school. I did it in middle school. Maybe I had a progressive school. I know,
Yeah.
Missy. The gray hair. We're just we're older.
Hmm.
Okay, here's what I'd love to hear from you. Who really owns all right, I've got some other like, okay, I love this. This was a fun. I know,
I
Lane,
like,
I learned on a typewriter too.
but I like the clickety clack of the typewriter, the noise.
I know we have a keyboard that replicates that. But you know what I don't miss is whiteout. I mean, when was the last time anybody bought whiteout, right? I love the backspace key other than whiteout. Okay. Anyways, um, all right. So who owns of any of these? Think about the last employee. That is spelled wrong. You onboarded. What was intentional and what was accidental in that experience? Who owns onboarding in your organization right now? And I'm talking about the long journey, not day one of orientation, but really who owns that? HR, the hiring manager, nobody in particular. And then what's the one thing a new emerging leader in your organization needs to understand in the first 30 days that they're probably not being told? So take any of those. I know you guys are talking about typewriters and pickleball.
We got off on a tangent.
But are there anybody here like in your onboarding that's working really well that you would be able to, oh gosh, the quick brown fox jumped over Lazy Ruth. Remembers that. Karen, I need your memory. This is amazing. Um, are there any of these questions that kind of strike you, and that you're like, yeah, we're doing this and I think it works really well. I want to learn
Yeah,
from
if I
you
look at
all.
these questions, I'm just sitting here, I'm like, if you, and I love AIM. Don't get me wrong. I've been here 15 years. Love AIM. I wouldn't stick around that long if I didn't. However, if I think about our onboarding process, I'm like, it kind of gets spread out between the entire team here because you gotta learn everything AIM in order to support our members. So we kind of have everybody drinking from the fire hose day one.
Yeah, somebody else used that exact terminology. And I think that's
Yes, I think
pretty,
it was Lane. Yeah.
yeah, pretty understandable. And so really on number two, we're saying, hey, HR and the hiring manager does that. Chris loves tangents. Good. I'm glad we can satisfy that. Learning development, specialize, organize the orientation, but the managers with prompting own the onboarding. And I think that that's probably a really good thing with HR structuring the onboarding, and an attempt for managers to own that the first year. And I think there's good intention. And so this is just a question, right? Here's another takeaway that you can take is, do we have a published schedule? And when we onboard, would I be able to go to your calendar at, say, day 90? And is there a follow-up scheduled with the hiring manager to check in on that new hire? And those are things I think we can drive it and get it even better, right? And being able to have those check-ins. Does your buddy system or your advocate that you assign them, do we have all of those scheduled? Because what I would love to see is day one, during that orientation, all of those meetings get scheduled, right? And then we've got the follow-up built in, bonus points if we could even put agendas, right, as we're doing that. And the reason I say this is because that touch is really, really important. And what we're finding is with the newest entrants into the market, right? So the latest, the end of the millennials, the beginning of the Gen Zs, feedback is something that keeps coming up over and over and over. And they're really wanting clarity around, hey, how do I get promoted? How do I do these things? And our managers are getting absolutely bombarded with those questions. And one of the things I learned in sales when I started in my career was you anticipate objections before they happen. And so every time we have a plan and a purpose and meetings on the calendar and that sort of thing, then we're able to offset some of that, right? Hey, that's a great question. Start a list and we're going to talk about that at your 30-day check-in. Or, hey, that's great. Why don't you give me those so I can research them and be very prepared, right? We need to be checking in more than, I mean, we need to check in daily when they first start and weekly and so forth. But I think if we have those disciplines in place, then it gives them an idea of what to expect it to. 60% of companies don't include career development and onboarding, and 45% of employees report that onboarding really lacked role clarity. I do hear this a lot. Yeah. So, Audrey, love this. Curious about 30, 60, 90-day plans for large organizations with hundreds of job types. Should there be an individualized plan for each role? I mean, the overwhelming answer is yeah, I think we do. I think that and Darla has a response to that. We have them create it, right? And I'm a big fan of templated PowerPoints, right? So, at the 1 week mark, we want you to be checking in on, are there any accounts you can't log into? Are there just any basic functionality that you don't have, right? The end of week 2, we're checking on, hey, have you been able to meet with your advocate? Have you been, like, there are these very, like, organizational wide things that we can think about in those check-in points um, to be able to check in and be able to do that. So, do I think every single role needs to have an own unique plan? Not necessarily, but what we're saying is that there is this defined process that we're going to do. And again, I think it's less and less about how formalized it is and more other than just the process is there, that we know we have kind of this catch-all because it's really easy for new employees to slip through the cracks. All right, so easy questions, right? On these quarterlies, for some of you that are already doing this, I would love go ahead and put some other questions in there. But where are you now, right? Like, how are you feeling? What do you feel like your current skill sets are? We kind of have these defined for the role. How you feeling on an energy scale and what's your engagement look like overall? Have the employee answer those, right? And come to that and create that safe space to be able to have that. And then where do you want to go, right? What values align with you aspirationally? Is there anything you've been curious about in the organization and how can we grow you? And then I think the important thing, again, kind of like that 30-day win, is how do we create a near-term action item together. And so why this ties into emerging leaders is that we're going to start seeing the people that thrive in this environment. They have clear expectations, they have the tools that they need, and then we're able to see really early on they're going above and beyond. What I think happens a lot of times is we don't have this almost rigidity to this onboarding process. Some of our emerging leaders fall through the cracks. We're not there to challenge them. We don't know how to do those things. So I think this process, no matter what it is, the process doesn't necessarily have to be perfect. It's just the fact that it exists. And that creates this environment where we can pull in emerging leaders. So, we have these processes to be able to identify them and to be able to have these conversations. I know some of you that are there, and these were sort of discussion points that I was thinking about is, does your organization have a defined career path for emerging leaders, or do people kind of have to figure it out on their own? And then what's the cost of that ambiguity? one of the things that we see in turnover, especially with people that maybe are high performers, is that if there is ambiguity of, hey, am I going to get promoted? Am I not going to get promoted? They have a tendency to just either burn out because they're like, I keep working hard and it doesn't seem like anybody notices, or they have a tendency to, see ya, and they're like, oh no, I just found a better opportunity, and they're gone. And so, really looking at who are your strong performers, who are those people that you want to put in a pipeline, and do the managers have the equipment needing to do that? So I've kind of given some high level, hey, when we're onboarding and we're trying to identify those emerging leaders, what happens in those first few months that gives managers sort of these tools, these assessments that they're able to look at it. And again, not even in a formal assessment, but a process that says, hey, we set up some goals, we knocked them down, things are going well. So for those of you that are not doing quarterly career conversations from day one, I just want you to maybe put in the chat, how would things look differently if you did that?
I would also posit, and I don't know, maybe, and I don't like, I just do the recruiting side, the onboarding side, like the pre-onboarding side, most of the time. But I would also maybe say, like, would we not be wanting to ask, did the job description and the information match what you currently are doing in the role? Because that's creating that clarity aspect a little bit more. Because if we're not asking that in these 30, 60, 90-day time frame, um, that's creating that turnover that we're seeing as well. Just,
100%,
just
Erin. I think
saying.
this is such an important thing. And yes, I mean, that's why we're checking in and asking some of these questions
Yeah.
around like, how are things going? And that's why we want a win. And hopefully that win is directly related to those job things. Job things. What?
Those job
That's
things,
right. My brain's like, okay.
those little
No, those
pesky things
the
that we do.
yeah, the demands of the job. So I do think it's really, really important we're asking that because sometimes employees do feel like it was a bait and switch, right?
Mhm.
And I love me a good Reddit thread. And you, Erin, I love your TikTok things, but how many like TikTok things have we heard of like, hey, I got hired to do this and now I'm doing this?
Mhm.
And so I think that's twofold, right? We are living in a time where there's information about everything, right? We didn't used to talk about this stuff. And now people have millions of followers and are talking about it. And so, one, I think that cultivates this awareness of like, even if they weren't dissatisfied with that, they run across something out in the media or social media and something gets triggered and they're like, oh, well, maybe I should be concerned about that. Right. And so it creates this scrutiny that maybe wouldn't have otherwise had. Okay. So going back to discussion, Chris, hopefully you're enjoying some of these tangents as well, that are not nearly as fun as some of the other ones. Um, Although, if you can put your favorite TikTok HR person that you follow, Erin and I would both be very interested in that. I will have to find them on Instagram because I'm not on TikTok, but they all migrate there anyways.
Oh.
But yeah, if there's anybody you love, the one guy is from like Britain and he reads like crazy things that happen in the workplace. I really enjoy him. Okay. Sometimes staff operational goals lack leadership skills necessary to be promoted. Even if part of the career pathing is taking a leadership course program, those skills may not stick. Is career pathing a guaranteed promotion? And if not, when do supervisors provide that feedback? Love this question, Audrey. I think this is great. From moment one, right? That we're talking about this. We are being very open about this. Hey, you're doing a great job. We hired you because we felt like you would be competent in this job. In all of the conversations we've talked about, I understand that you want to get promoted into this. We're going to do an assessment. That assessment's going to kind of tell you where you fall on these skill sets. And then I'm also going to use another tool. Maybe we do a leader 360, depending on the level of the employee. Maybe it's manager feedback. And when we look at this, everyone always has room to grow. And here's the list of things that you have an opportunity to grow. And being able to then translate that into the behaviors you're seeing in the workplace is really, really important. So if they're not, and then we come back and evaluate again, right? So that's the thing we have to understand is we're putting you on a path to succeed, but there's there's a gap. There's a gap between where you are today and where we need you to be. And we're going to do our best to articulate that and upskill you. But there's no guarantee of this. But this should be very, very clear. And I tell my managers this all the time that, I mean, what I've had to fire people, I never like firing people. It is like my least favorite part of the job, but it was never a surprise. And if your managers are feeling like when they have to terminate someone, it's a surprise, then we know we need to develop that manager. Maybe they're an emerging leader we need to pour into. So I think for the question on that, Audrey, is really we're going to put you on this path, but we've got to see these changes to happen so that we set you up for success. Because if we don't upskill you, then really what we're doing is we're doing a disservice to you. So let's talk about how we get there and then figure that out. Um, so we don't have a clear path for the emerging leader. Karen's saying we identify them through succession planning. Great, we're doing that. That's awesome, but need to develop after the identification. I think that's a pretty fair way, right? So we, when we first join, we're kind of evaluating and we're giving them those wins so we can evaluate against that. And then once they're tagged as, hey, they're a star performer, or they may have some potential in emerging leader, then we need to put them into some sort of really development cycles so that we're upskilling them. All right, I got to get checked in. Catch me up on the TikTok chatter. So, Erin, you got to let me know.
Well, Julie only does AIM social media options, which I
Oh,
love.
I love it. High
Follow us
bar.
on social
Aim needs
media.
to keep her entertained, though. I mean, really.
We're not on TikTok, unfortunately. Haven't gotten our social media to go on there yet, but you can follow us on YouTube. This is where you'll find the WoW session recordings
Like it.
always.
Like it.
But yeah, I'll give some TikTok suggestions on the follow-up email from today. Just
Okay. I love it. That would help me. Okay. Chris, yes. So in flat organizations, when we talk about career pathing, this is where it gets a little tricky, right? Because you've got this person, they're eager, they're like, okay, what do I do next? What do I do next? And you're setting them up and they're knocking down the obstacles, they're doing great work. And you're like, and I don't have anywhere to promote them into because no one's retiring anytime soon. So I do think looking at that, tiering out the different positions and being able to do that is really, really important and really segmenting that, right? Because what we're seeing is these emerging leaders are really looking for progression in their careers. And the other thing that I'm going to add to this is every job, I'm going to make a prediction, Aaron. I think every job in the next 5 years, and this is a pretty safe prediction because if we look back 5 years, it's probably true too. But new technology is emerging, so everyone's job is going to change. And so it is going to be less important the title we have because I think work is going to change under that title. But what we are going to have to be able to identify is skill sets under that title. And so being able to outline, okay, here's the skill set that we need. Here's, these are the things that we need. And then we can pull those different skill sets because managers are going to be confronted with technology and they're going to have to figure out how to get their team to utilize it and get the most out of it.
yes.
Yeah. Chris, we had essentially 3 levels with at least 10 years prior to retirement for everyone. Okay, cool. Gonna have to look up Auntie Bree. So sounds great. Aunt Bree.
She's amazing. She's a contract HR person. She's an independent contractor HR person. The scenario she comes up with on TikTok, like for her clients, crazy. Crazy.
Awesome. Love it. I love to learn in lots of modalities. Okay. All right. So we've kind of talked about, hey, when we bring somebody on, we want from day one for them to know that they have a future. They can buy into what we're doing here. We're going to give them tools. We're going to give them connection. We're going to give them a sense of belonging. We're going to do all of those things that sets them up to be as most engaged as they can, right? We're going to do that side of the equation. Then we're going to have tools via assessment, check-ins, quarterly progress, all of those things to say how are they responding to that, right? Are they meeting expectations? Do we think that they can take on more and be able to do that? And then what you all were sort of talking about in the chat is okay, what do we do with that information? Like how like now that we know this, how do we develop them? And there's training. AIM has a ton of training, and we can do things like Bud to Boss. We can do things like Leadership Essentials. And I think those are really important things, and we should do them. But, and, not but, and, What we're doing is we're really combining that content because content is easy to find, right? We were just talking about it on TikTok, right? You can find content everywhere. There's probably free YouTube training out there somewhere for every content. But what you can't get online in this open, open space, open knowledge type environment is connection and people to talk to. And so my argument is give them the knowledge, give them the tools, give them all of those things, but put them in an environment where they get to try it on. So to me, training oftentimes you go away for 3 days, you do 3 days worth of training, you come back with a binder, and I have binders on my bookshelf that haven't been opened since I did that training, right? It doesn't get implemented. So my argument here and an invitation to think about is if you're going to send people to training, also put them in a cohort. And what I mean by that is the training for me, if it's a 3 day and they go do it, then what we do is we meet for the next 6 months, 1 hour a month. Hey, we covered communication and training. How's that been going? What have been your challenges, right? And they get, some prompts ahead of time. They're able to talk about it. And so it's not necessarily, the cohort is not designed to be heavy learning. It's this idea that where are you struggling and how can we moderate a group discussion so that you get takeaways? Kind of like we're doing right now, right? Um, that's the whole idea is how do we create this culture? And I've watched this happen in organizations and it's amazing what it does to the culture because the number one thing that I see on your surveys when we do them is departments don't work well together. Well, now you look at a section of your organization, you take people from different departments, you put them on this learning path together where they get the information, you put them in a virtual room together. We don't even have to pull them into the same room if we don't need to. And we talk. Hey, how's it going? What's been your latest struggle? When you think about coaching in a coworker or a project team, what are those things? And so whether they're managers, whether individual contributors, we can sort of look at all of those skills that we've already assessed. Hey, they need these basic leadership skills, and we talk about them in the cohorts. I'm just curious, are you guys doing any type of internal cohort development training where you're tagging your emerging leaders and you're pouring into them and investing in them, not necessarily in a traditional training model, but more in a facilitated group conversation? Okay, Beth is starting. Love that. When they've hit in 5 to 10 years, poor Missy.
Maybe, maybe.
Maybe. If we can accelerate that we just started our first cohort. We're not currently, but it's something that we're wanting to. We are getting better. I love it, Missy. We're here to support. Karen says we're too small to create cohorts. So I want to talk about this too. So I had mentioned Edge mentoring. And what Edge did is they got several employers together and they formed cohorts for their emerging leaders. So that's something we're able to do too. So Julie, if nope, Karen, I got on the wrong name. If you're too small of an organization, we can look at you and say, okay, well, this is sort of the similar things that your people might be encountering, and then come together in that group cohort as well. So I love this. We're doing quarterly meetings for all people leaders, and I want to split the group out into emerging leaders. Amy, I love that. I think just intentional time that we get to step away from the work of the work and come in and really look at the people work is really important. Yeah, and I love, like Chris said, I love the consortium idea because it brings in different perspectives. And so you're able to take the best of a lot of different worlds. And if you've got a good facilitator, they're able to bring that out in everyone. And again, it creates that third place where maybe they say stuff in that external cohort that they wouldn't say in their internal, but for fear of those sorts of things. So coaching really does something different than training. Training is learning. We all get takeaways. A good, strong training facilitator is able to talk about those things and to drive towards outcomes. But coaching is consistent action over time. And that's what I really think about when I'm in there and I'm trying to change someone, whether it's grow them into a leader, whether it's turn around toxic culture. What we have to establish is this consistency over time that then we're able to really realize the change and being able to do that. So, all of those things, there's real world challenges. We normalize talking about that. For anybody that maybe is a really good leader, but they suffer from imposter syndrome, now is this really safe bubble that they can come in and be like, I'm struggling with this. Why am I struggling with that? How have you overcome it? And we're able to give them some of those tools to be able to do that. So I love it. You guys were already in here. But I'm really curious to know, like size was a barrier that came out in the chat. I know sometimes cost, although I will say group cohort development is some of the least expensive development that you have out of there. I'm curious if there's any other barriers, cost, time, size, that you're sitting there and going, yeah, we'd love to do this, but it's just not something that we can do because X. Go ahead and put that. And then I'm also wondering, do you have bandwidth, right? Because I think you can bring in an external resource to do these cohorts, but it also can be accomplished internally. And I think time is our biggest struggle. Time is hard. And I 100% agree with that. And I think in a time of just absolute burnout, where that's what people are reporting as some of the most experience, multiple locations, Michelle, I totally understand that, especially if you're bridging time zones. But that's why the online format works so well because we don't have to pull everybody in. There's ways to do that. But there is something about these emerging leaders. So the people that are really killing it, they're hitting all the objectives, they're doing a good job, are also reporting and I'm covering for other people and I'm starting to feel burnt out. So, how do we bring them in for an hour, 90 minutes, one Thursday a month, right? We've done some research on this. Thursday morning are the least meeting laden times of the week. Isn't that weird? Thursday mornings. Don't know why.
Very true. That's the most available time on my calendar. If you're looking for time on my calendar, folks, that's
Yeah.
key.
So one thing, protect that time is my thing. And being able to be that. Uh, so being able to do that and have that time, and it's 90 minutes a month, right? And do they leave with a sense of like they got to practice mindfulness, they're thinking about things, they're problem solving things. Maybe you pulled a lever that has been weighing them down, and so there's something that they can do. So I think that that's really important. All right, so we are coming up on time. And That's funny. Don, I just scheduled some leadership training with AIM on 2 Thursdays in August. I love it when my data is current and reliable. It's really, really fun. Um, all right, and we are coming up, right? We're done at the half
Yep,
hour.
it's 6 minutes. Yep.
Okay, all right. Well, time flies when we're having fun. Clearly, we were having fun.
Yeah.
All right, so I want to make it real. I always like to come back into some action items. So I know one thing we added to the agenda that wasn't clear was, hey, how do we identify those emerging leaders? And I hope that we talked about that, right? It starts from day one, from orientation to onboarding. It comes because it's role clarity. We're setting them up for success. We're doing assessments, we're driving towards quarterly performance evaluation, and then we're giving them not just their manager, but another advocate in the organization that they can talk and they can advocate on their behalf. So I'm curious, when we make it real, look at these strongest pillar. Which of the three things that we've talked about is are you doing well, right? Like, so getting them in the door, being able to find the talent, and then developing the talent. Where are you striving right now? What do you think is like, okay, that one's going really well? And then what is your biggest opportunity? Are there people falling through the cracks? Before this WOW session, which thank you everyone for accommodating the time change. I met with managers throughout the Midwest at a large manufacturing organization, and we were talking about how do you coach, and there's positive coaching and then there's corrective coaching, and then at the end we all went around and said, okay, who's that person that I need to go have a conversation with? And I was amazed at how many people were like, I need to go talk to the good people because I kind of overlooked them. And it sort of reinforced what we're talking about today, is that it's really easy to overlook a strong performer because they aren't a problem. So are there people falling through the cracks because we haven't done that? And for all of you, Missy, I'm looking at you. I think it was Missy. One day, we are getting better, right? What's one thing you could do in the next 30 days that would move the needle just a little bit? Um, I always love the 1% analogy, right? If you increased your step count by only 1%, you could start at something like 100 steps on day one and end up at like more steps than you could ever walk in a day. So what's that 1% improvement that we could add to this process? All right, so hit your keyboards, anything that you have.
I like the idea of having the outside the hiring manager department advocate, like maybe having like a single person in the company where in that first 30, 60, 90 days, they're checking in with that person that is
Mhm.
not the normal person that they would have contact on with a regular basis. Maybe
Yeah.
somebody who has institutional knowledge, length of service in the company that they can just be like another person, just that advocate for your culture in your organization. I like that idea because not a lot of organizations have that. And if you do, great. You guys are ahead of the curve. So,
Yeah, I love it. I think that I've seen a lot of like mentor, we call this like mentor, or they call it like the buddy when they hire in. And
mhm.
it's great, right? There's people in your organization that kind of get jazzed up about talking about the organization. And it's two ways, right? And I think there's always room to make that more formalized, not from like a corporate way, but just with more tools. So it is more consistent. Um, Lots of retirements coming soon. Oh, Jill, I feel you. Everyone's dealing with this. And then you've got, I don't know, I mean, I'm part of the Gen X generation, and there's a lot of us in our generation that are like, Psh, I don't want to be manager. I'm going to be just happy being an individual contributor. I'm going to come in, put my head down, and get my job done. So now you're looking at these really emerging leaders to fill some of these retirement roles. And how do we do that? And coaching to me is a major thing here. Let's figure out who they are. Let's get some assessments done. Let's give them some coaching. Let's do that for 6 months. Let's do a leadership 360, get feedback from their team, find out where they're deficient and how do we grow them. Because I think we started at the top of the hour, there are just constraints on the supply chain for employees. And that's going to be just a challenge. And so, yeah, Jill, I think a really strong plan on how do we support these people once we put them in the roles is going to be required. I mean, there's just no other way to put that. Um, Yep, develop career pathing in fiscal year 2027. There is an art to that. So if you feel like you get stuck in any way, please reach out to AIM to help with that because we can do that.
Okay.
Um, we need to work on develop my ideas for employees that won't necessarily be leaders in the future. Oh, Dawn, you touched on a really important part, and that is how do I drive engagement for people that are really where they're going to be, right? They're really good at their job. This is what we're going to ask of them. And how do we keep them engaged over the long haul? And I would say thinking about things like, do you have a culture committee? Do you have like these extra committees? Can they weigh in on change management? So things that maybe they're not a leader, but they definitely know the frontline parts of the business, and they're able to do that. So that would be something to think about. Hey, Chris, you popped in the Q&A, and yes, we did change the time because of my schedule. I was kind of a pain, and Aaron had to move things for me. So I'm glad you got an extra hour to get some things done and be able to do that. All right. So, I mean, we're here. We're done. Like this is crazy. Like that went really fast. Hopefully it went fast for all of you too. We maintained most of the people on a webinar, so that's pretty impressive. Give me a thumbs up if this was worth your time, and you have something that you can take back and implement. And then if you need help, we can definitely build that emerging leader program for you. And I know that Erin is going to follow up with some of that. Chris Caffell will be the one to reach out here. Reach out to Erin. She can get you connected. But Chris is probably going to be your most direct line into that.
Well, look, you just did my wrap up for me.
Oh, sorry. I
You're
forgot.
good. No, you're perfect. All right. Well, that was fantastic. Thank you so much, Tanya, for your time today. Thank you, everyone, for joining us on this Friday before a holiday weekend. I really think this is important information that we all needed to learn and things for lots of us to take away today. Like Tanya mentioned, there'll be a follow-up email with contact information for Chris and myself. So if you want to engage with us on this topic again, there'll be avenues to do that. Next month, hey, guess what? I'm your presenter. And we'll be back to
Yay!
normal time, 8:30 Central, 9:30 Eastern. And until then, hopefully you'll have a safe holiday and we will catch you next month. Bye,
But yeah,
everyone.